My ex told everyone I was crazy and unstable, so I let his new girlfriend discover the truth about him the hard way. When Marcus broke up with me after 3 years, he didn't just leave. He launched a full character assassination campaign that would make a seasoned political operative jealous. Suddenly, overnight, I transformed from his loving girlfriend into the psycho ex who couldn't handle rejection, the unstable one who made up wild, fabricated stories about his concerning behavior, the crazy girl who couldn't be trusted around sharp objects, social media, or mutual friends without supervision. Our entire social circle started avoiding me like I had contracted some sort of contagious mental illness that might spread through casual conversation. My coworkers began giving me weird, pitying looks after he visited my office to check on my mental state and subtly suggest to my boss that I might need professional help and possibly extended time off for psychiatric treatment. Even my elderly landlord called me one evening, his voice filled with genuine concern, asking if I needed resources for emotional support because a deeply concerned gentleman had reached out about my well-being and ability to maintain stable housing. The most infuriating part was how believable Marcus made it all sound. He had this way of tilting his head slightly when he spoke about me, his voice taking on this tone of sincere worry mixed with resignation, like he was a saint who had tried everything possible to help his troubled ex-girlfriend. But sadly, some people just couldn't be saved from their own destructive tendencies. Marcus was a master manipulator with the polished charm of a seasoned politician, and the calculating, strategic nature of a chess grandmaster planning moves 17 steps ahead. Successful, devastatingly handsome in that generic business magazine way, and convincingly sincere when he needed to be. He painted himself as the deeply concerned ex-boyfriend who just wanted his former girlfriend to get the professional help she desperately needed, while systematically destroying every relationship and support system I had built over the years. Looking back now, I can see how methodically he had isolated me during our relationship. It started small, casual comments about how my friends seemed jealous of our happiness, or how my family didn't really understand our connection. He'd suggest we skip social gatherings because he wanted to spend quality time together, just the two of us. He'd offer to pick me up from work so we could grab dinner, which meant I stopped getting drinks with colleagues. Slowly, gradually, my world became smaller until it revolved entirely around him. When I tried to rebuild those connections after our breakup, I discovered he had already laid the groundwork for my isolation. He'd been having concerned conversations with my friends for months, subtly planting seeds about my emotional instability and concerning behavior. He told them I'd been struggling with anxiety and depression, that I sometimes lashed out irrationally, that he was worried about my mental health but didn't know how to help. My best friend, Sarah, was the first to reveal the extent of his manipulation. 3 weeks after our breakup, she finally admitted that Marcus had been calling her regularly, expressing worry about my increasing paranoia and asking if she'd noticed any alarming changes in my behavior. He'd even suggested that my accusations about his controlling tendencies were a symptom of my deteriorating mental state. I thought he was just being caring, Sarah said, her voice thick with guilt. He seemed so genuinely worried about you, and you had been more withdrawn lately. Of course I had been withdrawn. Marcus had been systematically undermining my confidence and isolating me from everyone I cared about. But he was skilled enough to make it look like natural relationship evolution, and smart enough to start building his alternative narrative before I even realized what was happening. He told everyone I'd become obsessed with him after our breakup, that I'd been sending him threatening messages at all hours of the night, showing up at his workplace unannounced, and spreading malicious lies about their relationship because I couldn't accept that he'd moved on to someone better. None of it was true, but Marcus had always been extraordinarily persuasive, and people naturally wanted to believe the successful, charming businessman over the allegedly unstable woman. The genius of his approach was how he never directly said I was lying or crazy. Instead, he'd furrow his brow with concern and say things like, "I'm really worried about Emma. She's been struggling since our breakup, and I think she might be having trouble distinguishing between her feelings and reality right now." It sounded so much more credible than calling me a liar outright. 2 months after our breakup, just as I was starting to rebuild my social connections and regain some semblance of emotional equilibrium, he was dating Sophia, a sweet, naive marketing coordinator from his company, 24 years old, fresh out of college with stars in her eyes, and that particular combination of ambition and insecurity that made her perfect prey for someone like Marcus. She was everything I had been 3 years earlier: young, impressionable, eager to please, and completely unprepared for the sophisticated manipulation techniques of a man who had been perfecting his craft for years. She had long blonde hair that she wore in a sleek ponytail, bright blue eyes that lit up whenever she talked about her future, and the kind of optimistic outlook that comes from never having experienced real betrayal. I watched from a careful distance as he love-bombed her exactly the way he'd done with me in the beginning. The expensive flowers delivered to her office with romantic notes that made her colleagues swoon with envy. Surprise vacation bookings to exclusive resorts in Napa Valley and Big Sur. Public declarations of love on social media with carefully curated photos that made their relationship look like a fairy tale. The whole nauseating performance that I'd fallen for completely 3 years earlier when I was young and stupid enough to believe it was genuine affection rather than calculated manipulation. Marcus had a formula, and he followed it religiously. First came the overwhelming attention and affection, what psychologists call love bombing. He'd text constantly throughout the day, send flowers for no reason, plan elaborate surprise dates, and make grand romantic gestures that felt like something out of a movie. He'd tell you that you were different from every other woman he'd ever met, that he'd never felt a connection like this before, that he could see a future together. Then came the gradual isolation. He'd express concern about friends who seemed negative or unsupportive of your relationship. He'd suggest spending weekends together instead of going out with your usual social group. He'd offer to drive you places so you wouldn't have to take public transportation or ask friends for rides. Slowly, your world would shrink until he was at the center of everything. The control came next, disguised as care and concern. He'd want to know where you were going, who you'd be with, what time you'd be home. He'd call it wanting to make sure you were safe, or missing you so much he couldn't bear not knowing when he'd see you again. He'd frame possessiveness as devotion and jealousy as proof of how much he loved you. Finally came the psychological manipulation. He'd undermine your confidence with subtle criticisms disguised as helpful suggestions. He'd gaslight you when you questioned his behavior, making you feel like you were being irrational or overly sensitive. He'd collect information about your insecurities and vulnerabilities, then use them against you whenever you tried to assert independence. I had lived through the entire cycle, and now I was watching him restart it with fresh prey. When Sophia started following me on Instagram, I knew Marcus had told her about his problematic ex-girlfriend. Her direct message confirmed everything I'd suspected about the narrative he was spinning. Hey, I hope this isn't weird, but Marcus mentioned you might need someone to talk to. I've been through toxic relationships too, and I know how hard it can be to move on and heal from emotional trauma. If you ever want to grab coffee and chat about moving forward in a healthy way, I'm here. The message was so perfectly crafted to make me seem pathetic and broken that I had to admire Marcus's skill. He'd positioned himself as the concerned ex who cared enough to ask his new girlfriend to reach out to his troubled former partner. It made him look compassionate and mature while painting me as someone who needed intervention from strangers. But it also gave me the opening I'd been waiting for. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I crafted my response carefully, striking just the right tone of grateful vulnerability, mixed with lingering affection for Marcus. I suggested we meet at the small coffee shop 3 blocks from Marcus's apartment, the same place he'd taken me for our first official date 3 years ago, back when I still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. Sophia arrived 15 minutes early, looking nervous but determined to help the poor, unstable woman her wonderful boyfriend was so concerned about. She wore a soft pink sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in that same sleek ponytail, and she kept checking her phone like she was expecting Marcus to text her encouragement for this charitable mission. Marcus really cares about you, she said earnestly after we'd ordered our drinks, stirring her vanilla latte with the intensity of someone trying to solve world hunger. He talks about you sometimes when he's feeling reflective. He's genuinely worried you're not getting the professional help you need to process the breakup in a healthy way and move forward with your life. I smiled sadly, channeling every acting class I'd ever taken in college and drawing on genuine emotions from the darkest period of my life. He's always been so thoughtful about other people's well-being, such a caring soul. It's one of the things I loved most about him. Tell me, has he given you a key to his place yet? Her face lit up like Christmas morning, and I could see the pride and excitement she felt at reaching this relationship milestone. Actually, yes. Just last week. It felt like such a huge step forward in our relationship. He said he'd never given anyone a key that quickly before, but he trusts me completely and wants me to feel like his home is my home too. That's wonderful, Sophia. I'm so happy for you both. You seem like such a sweet person, and Marcus deserves someone who appreciates him. I'm sure he told you about his home security system? The cameras? She looked confused, her smile faltering slightly as uncertainty crept into her expression. Cameras? What cameras? He never mentioned any kind of security system. Oh, I paused, looking genuinely concerned and slightly uncomfortable, like I'd accidentally revealed something I shouldn't have. Maybe I shouldn't say anything. I don't want to cause problems between you two, especially when you're so happy together and building something beautiful. What cameras? She pressed, leaning forward with growing anxiety and setting down her latte with a slightly trembling hand. I pulled out my phone with apparent reluctance, opening a carefully organized folder I'd never shown anyone else. The screenshots were damning, but I presented them like someone sharing painful evidence rather than springing a trap. Marcus likes to document things. For his protection, he always said. He told me it was because he'd had problems with previous girlfriends making false accusations after breakups, and he wanted to protect himself legally. Her eyes widened as she saw the screenshots I'd taken during our relationship. Timestamps from hidden cameras positioned throughout his apartment, running 24 hours a day. Bedroom, bathroom, living room, kitchen, even the hallway. All recording continuously without the knowledge or consent of anyone who entered his space. This can't be real, she whispered, her hands starting to shake as the implications began to sink in. I found them during our second year together. Tiny cameras hidden everywhere you could imagine. When I confronted him about it, he said I was being paranoid and irrational, that I was imagining things and making up stories because I was jealous and insecure about his past relationships. He made me feel like I was losing my mind. I showed her more evidence. Photos of the microscopic cameras hidden in picture frames, air fresheners, decorative objects, even the smoke detector above his bed, all purchased under Marcus's credit cards, which I'd meticulously documented before he made me return his spare card and accused me of potential financial misconduct. He's been recording you since day one, I said gently, watching her face go pale as understanding dawned. Check your keyring carefully. Is there a small black device attached that you thought was just decorative? Sophia fumbled with her keys with trembling fingers, her face going ashen as she found the tiny recording device attached to her keychain, disguised as a cute little charm he'd given her during their second week of dating, telling her it was a symbol of how much she meant to him. Oh my God, she breathed, staring at the device like it might explode in her hands. There's more, I continued carefully, watching her emotional state and moderating my revelations accordingly. Has he asked you a lot of personal questions about your past relationships? Your family problems? Things you're ashamed of or embarrassed about? She nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes like a horrible sunrise. He keeps detailed files on everyone, comprehensive notes about vulnerabilities, fears, emotional triggers, things he can use for leverage later if needed. When I tried to leave him the first time, he threatened to tell my boss about my father's gambling addiction and my family's financial problems. Intimate details I'd shared with him in confidence during vulnerable moments. I showed her pictures I'd secretly taken of the filing cabinet in his home office during one of the few times he left me alone in his apartment. Folders meticulously labeled with women's names, including mine and several others I didn't recognize. Each folder was thick with handwritten notes, printed emails, screenshots of private conversations, and personal information that could only have been gathered through systematic surveillance and manipulation. He's done this before, I said quietly, letting the weight of that statement settle. I wasn't his first victim, and you won't be his last. There's a whole system to how he operates refined over years of practice. Sophia was crying now, tears streaming down her face as the full scope of his manipulation and violation became clear. I told all my friends you were making up stories about him. I defended him to my family when they said he seemed controlling and possessive. I called you crazy behind your back and felt sorry for him for having to deal with a psychotic ex-girlfriend. It's not your fault, I said firmly, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. He's a professional at this. He's had years to perfect his technique, and he's incredibly good at making his victims feel complicit in their own manipulation. The coffee shop was getting busier around us, but our conversation existed in its own bubble of horror and revelation. I could see Sophia processing everything, connecting dots that had been invisible to her just an hour earlier. We need to document everything, she said suddenly, wiping her eyes and straightening her shoulders. If he's doing this to me and he did it to you, he's probably doing it to other women too. Do you have access to his laptop? I asked. She nodded grimly. He gave me the password last week, said he wanted complete transparency between us and that trust was the foundation of any healthy relationship. We drove to Marcus's apartment in her car, my stomach churning with familiar anxiety as we approached the building that had once felt like home, but now represented 3 years of systematic violation and control. He was at his monthly golf game, a standing appointment every Saturday from 2 to 6 p.m. with his business associates, during which he networked and conducted informal business while maintaining his image as a successful, well-connected professional. I knew his schedule better than my own after 3 years of planning my life around his routines and availability. Saturday golf, Wednesday evening squash league, Friday drinks with colleagues, Sunday morning gym sessions. He was predictable in his self-care and social obligations, which made planning this intervention much easier. Using Sophia's key, we entered the apartment that had once been my second home. Everything looked exactly the same. The expensive furniture we'd picked out together during weekend shopping trips, the artwork I'd helped him choose from local galleries, the kitchen where I'd cooked elaborate dinners for his friends and business associates. But now Sophia could see what I'd tried desperately to tell people for months. The cameras were everywhere, and once you knew what to look for, they were impossible to miss. Sophia found his laptop on the desk in his home office, while I located the external hard drives hidden behind books on his shelf. Terabytes of storage containing years of recordings, meticulously organized by date and woman's name. The violation was staggering in its scope and calculation. Jesus Christ, Sophia whispered, staring at the laptop screen with a mixture of horror and fascination. There are hundreds of videos of me sleeping, showering, changing clothes, having private phone conversations with my family. He's been watching everything. Check the folder labeled insurance, I suggested, my own stomach turning as memories of my own discovery flooded back. She clicked and we found audio recordings of private conversations spanning months. Sophia crying to him about her mother's mental health issues and her fears of inherited depression. Me discussing my anxieties about job security and my father's drinking problem. Other women sharing intimate details of childhood trauma, sexual assault, and family dysfunction. Each recording was labeled with clinical precision, dates, times, emotional states, vulnerabilities revealed. It was like a psychological dossier designed to weaponize our most private moments against us. He's been building blackmail material on all of us, I said, feeling sick all over again. Emotional leverage to use if we ever tried to leave or expose him. Sophia was crying harder now, tears streaming down her face as the full scope of his manipulation became clear. I told all my friends you were making up stories about him. I defended him to my family when they said something seemed off about our relationship. I called you a psychotic ex-girlfriend behind your back and felt sorry for him for having to deal with your alleged harassment. Please don't blame yourself, I said firmly. This is exactly what he does.
luckily
He turns
it's
his
just,
victims into accomplices by making them participate in discrediting previous victims.
I'm
It's
back
part
at
of
the
his system.
beginning,
We methodically
bro.
copied everything onto multiple secure drives, working in tense silence as we documented years of
Okay.
systematic violation.
I'm just
But
a
I had
little
one more
tense right
revelation
now.
that would
Now
ensure
we have to
Marcus
pee,
never
but, like, I
manipulated
don't
another
really
woman
wanna
again.
die.
Sophia, I need to show you something else,
just
but it's
wanna
going to be
find
really
those
difficult to
guys so I
see.
can, like,
Check his
get
browser
outta here
history under
already.
private browsing. She navigated to his supposedly deleted browsing data, which wasn't actually deleted, just hidden in a folder innocuously marked
When
Tax
boss
Documents
out too.
2019-2023.
I'll fit too.
What we found made both of us physically ill. Marcus wasn't just recording women without consent for his own gratification or control. He was selling the content on private forums and specialized websites. Hundreds of videos of intimate moments,
Get 'em.
labeled with our real names, ages, physical descriptions, and personal information. Shower videos,
Get 'em. I
bedroom
believe in
footage,
you.
private conversations, all packaged and sold to strangers on the internet for profit. He's been profiting off our privacy, I said, feeling nauseated
I
even though
believe
I'd
in you.
suspected this for months after noticing
talk about-
unexplained income deposits in bank
this
statements
dude.
he'd carelessly left visible. We've been his product this entire time. The financial records showed thousands of dollars in payments from various adult websites and private collectors who specialized in voyeuristic content.
Alrighty.
He'd been running a sophisticated exploitation operation, using his charm and manipulation skills to recruit unwitting victims
that
who
money.
became content producers without their knowledge or consent. Sophia stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over the chair and causing the
Right
laptop
back
to slide
toward-
dangerously close to the
towards
edge
the
of the
merchant's
desk.
bags.
I'm calling the
A
police
long
right now.
fire went.
This is criminal. This is... Wait, I said, grabbing her arm
the
gently but
bathroom,
firmly. Let's be
multiple places
strategic
seem to
about
be
this.
empty.
We need to
Okay.
document everything properly first, or he'll find a way to destroy the evidence and discredit us both. Over the next 3 hours, we systematically photographed and copied every piece of
Yeah, one
evidence
of
we
them
could find.
scared me.
Screenshots of his video collections,
ate 'em
financial records
whole.
showing his
So I
profits
killed
from
them,
selling our private
and
content,
not just the
email
large ones.
correspondence with buyers and website administrators,
medium
and
ones and
detailed
small ones
spreadsheets
too.
tracking his
That's the
victims and
anything record.
earnings. But the most
Pretty bad
damning
at
evidence was his
fine,
personal
but I know
database,
some
a
survived,
comprehensive
so here they
spreadsheet
would
tracking
eat
which
us.
women had discovered his behavior and how he'd successfully discredited
That's
them.
hacked.
My name was at
Okay,
the top
well,
of the
whatever.
neutralized threats list,
See you, mate.
with detailed notes about his successful character assassination campaign and reputation destruction
Oh.
protocol. The notes were chillingly clinical. Subject responded to isolation tactics as expected. Social network successfully poisoned against her. Reputation damage sufficient to prevent credible accusations. No further action required. Other women were listed under active management, including Sophia,
it.
with specific strategies for keeping them compliant, isolated from support
I
systems,
break the piggy
and
bank?
emotionally
That'd be funny.
dependent. Sophia's entry included notes
can.
about her insecurities regarding her mother's mental health and her desperate desire to prove she could maintain a stable relationship.
Oh, I got my
There were
money
also
back.
women listed under future targets,
can't tell
with
if he's
notes
angry
about their
about that or not.
vulnerabilities and the best approaches for recruitment. Some I recognized from his workplace and social circles.
Nothing
Young, attractive
still?
women in
Okay,
subordinate
whatever.
positions who would be flattered by attention from a successful older man. We copied everything and left the apartment before Marcus returned from golf, making sure to reset everything exactly as we'd found it, so he wouldn't suspect what we'd discovered. That Monday morning, Sophia and I walked into the police station together,
buddy.
armed with multiple flash drives full of evidence and a
Bye.
detailed timeline of Marcus's criminal behavior spanning several years. We filed reports for voyeurism, invasion of privacy, distribution of intimate images without
my
consent,
God.
stalking, and computer fraud.
How
The detective
violent
assigned
is
to
he?
our case was Detective Maria Gonzalez, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor who'd clearly seen this type of case before and understood the complexity of
that
proving
money.
systematic psychological manipulation.
Give me your
How many other
money.
victims do you think there are? She asked, reviewing our evidence with an increasingly grim
talk about
expression.
shiitake.
At least
No, I
12
don't
based
want
on his
shiitake.
files, I replied, but probably more who haven't been cataloged yet or who managed to escape before he
Outta
added
here.
them to his database. Detective Gonzalez nodded grimly. We'll need to contact every woman
They
mentioned in
must
his records.
go.
This is
Oh,
going to be a
they want
complex
more
case that
money.
might take months to fully investigate. Within a week, investigators had
I kinda like
contacted
my
every
current
woman
setup.
mentioned in Marcus's files.
The only thing I would
8
want
others came
different
forward
is
with
the
similar
shield. I don't
stories of
want the shield
manipulation,
anymore.
secret recording, and systematic
Aside from that,
discrediting
though,
when
we're
they tried to
kinda
seek out
ready
or
to
end their
move on.
relationships. The pattern was always the same. Intensive love bombing followed by gradual isolation from
Okay.
support systems, collection of compromising material and personal
Where
vulnerabilities,
are the demons,
increasing
bro?
control and psychological manipulation, and vicious retaliation against anyone who tried to leave or
Out here
expose him.
fighting for my
Marcus was
life. Where
arrested
the
at his
demons
office
at?
on a Thursday morning, led away in handcuffs in front of his colleagues and clients. The local newspaper ran a front-page
Okay.
story about the prominent businessman charged with multiple counts of voyeurism and exploitation. His company immediately suspended him pending investigation, and several business deals fell through as partners distanced themselves from the scandal. Local news picked up the story after court documents became public, and suddenly the narrative shifted completely. Everyone who had believed his lies about me was calling to apologize, but the damage to my career and relationships had
outta
already been done.
here. I
Some
got the
trust,
oven
once broken,
axe.
can never be fully repaired.
That's
The best
interesting.
part was watching Marcus try to rebuild his image while facing multiple felony charges. His expensive lawyer held press conferences claiming his client was the victim of a vindictive ex-girlfriend orchestrating an elaborate revenge scheme, but the evidence was overwhelming, and the number of victims made conspiracy claims increasingly absurd. His lawyer initially suggested a plea deal, admission of guilt in exchange for a reduced sentence and avoiding the publicity of a trial. Marcus refused indignantly, convinced he could charm his way out of consequences like he always had. His narcissism wouldn't allow him to admit wrongdoing or accept that his victims had outsmarted him. The trial lasted 3 weeks and was covered extensively by local media. 12 women testified about his pattern of manipulation, recording, and retaliation. The evidence was overwhelming. Hours of video footage, detailed financial records, comprehensive documentation of his methods and victims. Marcus's defense strategy was to claim all relationships were consensual, and that recording in his own home was legal. His lawyer tried to paint us as bitter ex-girlfriends seeking revenge and attention, suggesting we had conspired together to frame an innocent man. But the evidence of secret recording, financial exploitation, and systematic manipulation was impossible to explain away. The prosecutor methodically presented Marcus's own documentation of his crimes. His spreadsheets tracking victims, his financial records showing profits from exploitation, his detailed notes about manipulation strategies. It was like he had provided a comprehensive instruction manual for prosecuting himself. Marcus was convicted on 14 counts of voyeurism, 3 counts of distribution of intimate images without consent, 2 counts of stalking, and 1 count of computer fraud. He received 8 years in prison and was required to register as a sex offender upon release. His civil cases are still ongoing. 9 women, including me, filed lawsuits for invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and lost wages due to his retaliation campaign. Our lawyer says the settlements will likely reach 7 figures total, especially since Marcus had been profiting from our exploitation and had significant assets to liquidate. More importantly, Marcus can never do this to another woman again. The conviction ensures he'll be monitored after release, his reputation is permanently destroyed, and any future romantic partners can easily discover his history through sex offender registries. Sophia and I became unlikely friends through this process. She quit her job and moved across the country for a fresh start, but we stay in touch regularly. The experience bonded us in a way that transcended the awful circumstances of how we met. She's in therapy working through the trauma, but she's stronger than she gives herself credit for. Last month, she sent me a photo from her new apartment with her boyfriend, a genuinely kind man who asked permission before posting a couple photo on social media and respects her boundaries completely. He thinks I'm wonderful exactly as I am, she texted. No documentation required. The criminal justice system doesn't always work for women like us. Too often, charismatic manipulators escape consequences while their victims are discredited and silenced. But sometimes when we support each other instead of competing, we can expose the truth and protect future victims. Marcus spent 3 years convincing people I was crazy and unstable. He nearly destroyed my career, my relationships, and my mental health with his calculated lies and systematic manipulation. Now he's the one behind bars, and I'm thriving in ways I never thought possible. Truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Sometimes it just needs the right person to help dig it up. And sometimes the best revenge is simply letting someone else discover what you already knew. The most satisfying part wasn't seeing Marcus get arrested or convicted. It was watching Sophia transform from a naive victim into a fierce advocate for other women. She now volunteers with organizations that help survivors of intimate partner surveillance and speaks publicly about recognizing manipulation tactics. We turned our victimization into power, and that's something Marcus can never take away from us.